Good morning, juniors. You can probably still hear it in my throat that I'm on my way out of this virus, I hope, or this virus is on its way out of me. Anyway, it's actually been a pretty mild case and a pretty pleasant few days kind of sitting in my room by myself, reading, building models, and watching cool films. That's right, I watch films, not movies, because I'm artsy like that. Anyway, let's go over the week. Let's do a little recitation practice. We're going to keep working at that, even though most of you did quite well on the TFM last week. We're going to just keep hammering it home. Repetition is the mother of mystery. Repetition is the mother of memory, a famous Roman, I think, once said in Latin. And then we're going to look at the story of Ballin so far, as we've got it, raise some interesting questions, I hope, and then prepare you all for your reading to finish it up by Thursday, where we'll discuss it in full. So you can see on the board now that the homework for tonight is 34 through 45, 11 pages. That'll get you all the way through the Ballin story. Just encouraging you to keep your pencils active during that story. It is like most of them you've noticed so far. I heard someone say he needs a little bit of ADHD medication, maybe sometimes it feels like, because it's just, one moment you're talking about this character, the next moment another character, and it feels like things don't get developed as quickly as they could. And that, that's part of what we'll explain in a little bit. That's part of the project that Mallory's undertaking. It's also a feature of the early stages of this book. So as this book proceeds, you're going to feel that it gets a little bit more focused. But there's always going to be these elements of like characters just coming in out of nowhere, that play a dramatic role in the turn of events. I hope today to give you a lens for reading through these stories like that and sort of dealing with these accessory events and characters who seem to come in out of nowhere. There is a way to do it, and there is still a lot of value in the story, even though, as a modern novel, it probably wouldn't run away as a bestseller or anything like that. Okay, so that's tonight's homework, and then Thursday night's homework is to continue reading. That's 46 through 52. We'll be picking up on Monday with regular classes, I hope, after a fun, exciting weekend of weekend of Burns activities. Okay, so Friday, remember, is Burns Day. We're going to have a bunch of fun stuff to do that day, including dance practice. Woohoo! And then next Thursday, okay, I'll remind you this when we get to class next week, but next Thursday we're going to have our colloquy that I promised. It'll include reading that last essay in the packet I gave you at the beginning of the year, beginning of the semester. And you probably noticed that I mispronounced the word sucker because I hate that it's pronounced that way. I want it to sound more British, but it doesn't. And anyway, there we go. It just, it means give help to or aid to. Okay, so let's remove some places and see if we can still do it. All right, ready? The king stablished all his knights and gave them that were of lands not rich. He gave them lands and charged them never to do outrageosity nor murder, and always to flee treason, and by no mean to be cruel, but to give mercy unto him that asketh mercy, upon pain of forfeiture of their worship and lordship of King Arthur for evermore, and always to do ladies, damosels, and gentlewomen succor upon pain of death. Also that no man take no battles in a wrongful quarrel for no law, nay, for no world's goods. Table round, both old and young, and every year were they sworn. That last part gives me such trouble. So there it was. Unto this were all the knights sworn of the table round. Okay, that's what I always forget. All right, well, there you go. That's where we get started for today. Let's get into some features of the story. Okay, now, as we've said, it's kind of got a confusing plot, but it has some consistent things. Let me explain why. It may not even have occurred to you why the plot was confusing. You may have just had a hard time following it. So I'm going to give you a couple of, indicators of just how tangly this plot gets. First of all, there's Balin's past. All we're told is that he was imprisoned for killing a relative of King Arthur's. Like, men killing other men happens all the time in this culture. So we're wondering, like, what did he do? Did he, like, did he just get on somebody's bad side? But because he wasn't like, it wasn't like Arthur went out there to avenge his relative's death. He put him in prison, which usually indicates that the death was maybe a murder or some other kind of violation of chivalry or the law. So we don't know, though. We just know that Balin has this checkered past and he's returning to Arthur's court. Now, the next thing we notice right away is that everybody's got somebody else to blame, and the story seems to change every single time we meet a new character. So the first character we meet after Balin is going to be the Lady Lyle of Avalon. Now, this mystical island of Avalon is going to play in later. We don't hear a ton about it, but it seems to be this kind of this land of semi-perfection and semi-permanence where I guess Arthur eventually goes after his death. I think I'm a little fuzzy on that, but it's a mythical place, and it's usually pretty positive. Okay, now, but she doesn't seem to be so positive, right? First of all, she tells us, I've got this sword, and it's a burden to me. So I'm carrying this sword. It sounds like she doesn't even want the sword, right? And she needs a knight of truth and valor, even a knight who's free of all sin. Now, this kind of thing is pretty common in these Arthurian tales. You have some strange figure show up with some sort of magical incantation hovering over them, and the only person that can ever, alleviate their burden has to be some morally upstanding and actually singularly upstanding knight, usually. And that's going to happen again. You're going to see it happens with Lancelot, happens with King Arthur. Reminds us even of the Sword and the Stone. Okay, so this part, so far we're like, okay, interesting. We're used to seeing these kinds of things. Who's going to prove themselves to be able to bear this description, truth and valor, free from all sin? Well, of course, Balin's the one who ends up doing it. He takes the knight, takes the sword, and then refuses to give it back. We're going to return to that in a moment. But then the Lady of the Lake shows up, and her arrival is a pretty big deal. I mean, she apparently comes in a lot of pomp and circumstance. She right away says, remember that sword I gave you, Arthur? Well, you promised to do me a favor, so now I need it. I want Balin's head right now. And Arthur's like, heck no, I'm not doing that. Plus, I think he's already gone by the time she shows up. And this one, she says, oh, shoot, I'll take him or the lady that brought the sword because he killed my husband and she, quote, caused the death of my father. So we got, now the Lady of the Lake is telling us that Lady Lyle is actually guilty and needs to be punished because she caused the death of the father. And Balin apparently killed Lady of the Lake's husband. Was that like in addition to the crime that got him sent to jail for killing one of Arthur's relatives? Were they the same person? We don't know. Okay. Then Balin gives us his story and says when he kills the Lady of the Lake, okay, I'm wrong. He was definitely there when Lady of the Lake shows up. That's why I killed her. All right. So Lady of the Lake, yeah, I'm calling her LOL for obvious reasons. Okay. So LOL, she kills a lot of good knights according to Balin, and more importantly, caused the burning of his mother. Now, when you're going to see later that Guinevere gets close to being burned alive, and it's a serious kind of crime. Her crime is going to be like treason against King Arthur. Now, that treason is going to happen to take the form of accused adultery, but other things would have been witchcraft. It was pretty serious sins to be burned at the stake. It wasn't just like you messed up and went over the speed limit in your horse or something like that. So Balin kills Lady of the Lake right there in front of Arthur, which violates the code of chivalry big time, specifically the provision against outrageosity. Okay, there's the positive provision to always do ladies, damosels, and gentlewomen succor upon pain of death. That's a positive requirement. You have to do these things. But this is the negative requirement of outrageosity is exactly this kind of thing. It would be rape. It would be some other abuse of strength against a weaker party. And so there Balin has to leave, right? Of course, because he's in big trouble. Well, then Merlin shows up, and he's got a totally different story, too. He tells us that the Lady of Lyle actually went to the Lady of the Lake in help for avenging her lover who'd been killed by her brother. And that the sword was given to the Lady Lyle by the Lady of the Lake, told that, hey, this would, whoever takes this sword from you, the next person, they'll be destined eventually to kill your evil brother who killed your lover. And So we could start raising all kinds of interesting questions here. We're like, so hold on, if the Lady Lyle was the sworn enemy of the Lady Lake, why is the Lady of the Lake helping her? You know, or is that the reason that the sword became a burden? Or why didn't the Lady of the Lake just dispense with the Lady Lyle right then and there? You know, if she has all this animosity against her, um, and then like it sure seems like a lot of husbands and brothers are dying around here. You know, like what's going on? Are we getting is everything getting straight? Are we getting this all exactly the way is this all exactly what we're the way it's supposed to be, right? So that's where we're left here. We're thinking um, it's just a lot of confusing points here, and what accounts for them all? Because isn't this supposed to be mostly a story about Balin? The answer is yes. I mean, this is a story about Sir Balin. He is the foreground focal point of the whole thing. So first thing we need to do is understand what Mallory is all about. We're going to call him a creative curator. Okay, he is not the original storyteller. These are not coming out of his own brain whole cloth. I mean, a lot of it might be coming out of his brain. Well, I'd say some of it might be coming out of his brain, but most of it, the bricks, if you will, are they exist prior to his telling the story. I mean, he's not the first one to do this. Most of it was written in French. It's been told, over and over again. There's the oral tradition behind even the written tradition. And so if you want to think of it, Mallory's creative project is to put the mortar between the bricks and to arrange these bricks into a structure that has a kind of beauty and meaning in its own right. So for what we're dealing with here then is he's got all these, these surrounding contextual details about different ladies and Merlin and the dramas and sagas that preceded Balin's adventure and that give rise to it. They're the background and Balin is the foreground. And so what you're going to see again and again is that Mallory is going to harness these legendary tales to help motivate a character through their adventures. And I think the best way for us to handle this is to let the foreground and focus be the foreground and focus of our reading and attention. So if a character is if a series of stories is clearly about one or another characters, let's let those characters kind of stay in the spotlight, and the shadowy edges and the background details we can allow some leeway there for Mallory, because he's piecing things together and they don't always fit. I mean, there's not always an agreement. You may remember the story of Iphigenia's sacrifice. Remember when we covered that last year in the Agamemnon, we realized that as far as the mythic background goes, there were about 3 or 4 different versions of what happened to Iphigenia on that altar. According to Aeschylus, the deed was done and she was murdered on the altar there, and that's why Clytemnestra seeks vengeance. But there are other stories where she sort of magically vanishes and gets taken off to an island somewhere. There's other stories where a replacement is put down, at the last minute, kind of Abraham Isaac style. So that's the same thing's happening here with Mallory. He's got all these background stories and they're not always consistent. So let's talk about Balin then. Let's look at what we know about him and what we're seeing develop about his character. The first major fact about his character is that he turns out to be returning to Arthur after prison. He says to restore his fortunes. Well then, not a few pages into his new adventures, we see him losing favor again, right? And then what does he say? I am going to go find this guy, King Rance, who's, by the way, just a one-dimensional villain, just inserted into the plot. He probably has his own history, but it's not wildly important for our purposes. He's just invading and wreaking havoc all around Wales. And Arthur's going to go punish him, because that's what Arthur does. He keeps peace. He fights for justice, right? But Balin's like, hey, I'm going to beat Arthur to Rience, and then I'll show Arthur that I'm a good guy again, and he'll receive me again. See, the theme that we're seeing is that Balin is a man in search of restoration. Okay? And that's wildly important. It's at this moment where we begin to think, well, now, this is maybe something I could connect with. Because in some sense, we are all also seeking this restoration, right? I think it might be appropriate at this point to compare him or to begin thinking about some other stories in our past, especially the Oedipus story. Um, Oedipus too arrives at Thebes, with kind of a checkered past, not necessarily having gotten out of prison or committed some crime, at least not that he knew of yet, right? But he had this prophecy hanging over him. He had abandoned his home, what he thought to be his mom and dad, and was seeking a new life for himself, right? And his victory over the Sphinx seemed to have given it to him. It showed him to be a wise and brave hero. He was made king of Thebes. He marries the queen of Thebes, who later turns out to be his mother. Think about that as a parallel to Balin, who shows up at Arthur's court with a little bit of a shadowy past, looking to build a new life. And first thing that happens to him is this, indicator that he is a knight of truth and valor, free from all sins. Like, woo, that's just what he needed. And then boom, the next thing he does is commit an act of shame against chivalry and has to leave. And now he's again trying to restore his self. Possibly could even link this to the idea of atonement, trying to make up for past sins. Okay, so let's move on to some questions about the reading where we'll have a chance to discuss. I'll ask the substitute teacher to use the pause button on the remote at this point to give you guys some time to discuss some of these things, and I'll follow up with a comment at the end. And then once this is done, if there's still time left in class, I'd love for you to get a chance to get some of your homework reading taken care of before you even leave the room. All right, so the first question is about this phrase, simul peccator et justus. We remember that means simultaneously sinner and saint. And we used it we discussed it in the context of King Arthur and Martin Luther King last week. So now, here's what I want to ask. Is Balin's murder of the Lady of the Lake an indication of his status as simul peccator et justus? So if the substitute will give you about 90 seconds to jot down an answer in your journal, and then let's share those answers, and we'll move on from there. Okay, so hopefully by now you've had a chance to discuss this yourselves, and maybe you've already noticed, but here is what I think is the outstanding feature of this question. When we talked about King Arthur and, there's my dog, if we talked about King Arthur and Martin Luther King as examples of a simultaneous sinner and saint, we meant by that they were capable of distinct acts, some of which are acts of justice and some of which are acts of injustice. So King Arthur's, positive contributions to promoting Christianity, to stabilizing his kingdom, the requirement of the Pentecost oath, all of those we take to be like legitimately good actions that are making positive changes from the administration of his dad, Uther Pendragon. Okay. Similarly, the work that Martin Luther King did, like to end segregation, to establish stronger voting rights for all citizens of the country, those were positive goods. We're not like qualifying those and be like, well, it was kind of good, it was kind of evil. No, it was like genuinely good. But then both of these characters had a darker side, and they had acts that were unqualifiedly bad. So we say like the attempt to rid England of all these children who might or might not be the one destined to bring down Camelot. Well, we're just like, well, that's villainous. We can do the whole Boethian analysis thing here and say he's trying to protect himself. But it's clearly an instance of idolatry. He's idolizing his own security, his own power, and he's willing to do something really dastardly to protect that. Okay, when it seems threatened. Similarly, with Martin Luther King, his commission of adultery and his love of pleasure. Now again, we think pleasure is a good thing. With Boethius, we're like, this is his heart kind of guiding him back to God in some strange ways, but obviously in a really sinful and wicked manner. And they're easy to see. It's easy to spot. It's like these are just really bad things. So it's like we've got these distinct actions. King Arthur and Martin Luther King do some good and some evil. Similarly with David and Goliath. Think about him. Like, he slays the giant. He sleeps with Bathsheba and kills her husband. These are like, they're pretty clear in themselves. Whereas with Balin, the whole mix gets muddled up because the distinction gets muddled up because the same action is both righteous and sinful. It's righteous in the sense that he has finally avenged an injustice on a person who apparently deserved it, right? So it sounds like the Lady of the Lake is not a savory character and has done a lot of evil, killing good knights and especially having Balin's mother committed to the flames. But the manner in which he seeks vengeance for these injustices is clearly a violation of chivalry and clearly dishonors King Arthur and severs his relationship with King Arthur. And so what the upshot of this is that we're now forced to ask whether in our human condition and whether as being members of this category, simul peccator et iustus, whether it is possible for us to commit a pure, unqualified act of goodness. Now, we're just going to raise that question for now without answering it, but just ask yourself, which of these two is more accurate to our lives? Is it that we sometimes do good and sometimes do bad, like King Arthur and Martin Luther King? Or is it that the same actions in our lives that appear to be good and that by all accounts are accomplishing some good are also at the same time putting us in the status of sinner, of injustice, in the same act, right? So that would make things a lot thornier, obviously. Second question. Was Balin's refusal to return the sword to Lady Lyle, a moral failing? Turn with me now to page 31, and let's read a portion of this together. Then I will pause the recording for some discussion. Okay, so let's just review the section where this all takes place, and then I'll have the substitute pause for a good 5 minutes or 7 minutes to allow you to discuss. Near the top of page 31, we read, "The lady saw that he was a good-looking man, but she believed that his outward show of poverty meant that he had committed some villainy in the past. 'Do not put yourself to any trouble,' she told him. 'What makes you believe that you can succeed where others have proved unable to do so? You do not look like a fortunate knight.' 'Ah, lady, fine clothes do not make an honest knight. I have within me that which passes show. I have strength and sincerity. Many good knights go through the world unknown.' 'You speak truth, sir, so try your strength.' Sir Balin took the hilt and drew out the sword without any difficulty. The king and the court looked on in astonishment, but the bitter envy of other knights was thereby aroused by his triumph." More on that later, right? "You have succeeded," the lady said. "You are the most virtuous of all knights, free of the vices of felony or treason. You will achieve many wonderful feats in the course of your life. Now, gentle and courteous knights, give me back the sword." "Oh, no, dear lady. I have earned the right to keep it. I will fight anyone who tries to take it from me." "Well," she said, "this is not wise of you. I tell you this. With this sword you will slay your best friend. With its blade you will cut down the man whom you most love in the world. This sword will bring your ruin. I will take the chance. I will abide by God's will, but I shall not surrender it to any other man." "You will repent of this shortly," she replied. "I am sorrowful for your sake, not for mine. It is a great pity that you will not be persuaded." With that she left the court weeping, while Balin called for his horse and armor. Okay, let's pause the recording. The question is, was that refusal right there, was that a moral failing on some respect? Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to discuss that now. Here are my thoughts. I think it's pretty hard to pin a particular sin on Balin at this moment in his journey. However, his assertion to have earned the sword, I think, is highly suspect. I'm asking, in what sense did you earn it? It seemed like the sword named you as a knight of virtue when, by all accounts, you didn't have a lot going for you. In fact, you were here at the court apparently trying to restore yourself to Arthur's good graces. So the declaration, "I have earned it," again, it reminds me of Oedipus. Remember when Oedipus was confronted by Tiresias and told, actually, you're the guy causing the curse at Thebes. You're the one who murdered the king. One of Oedipus's tactics in responding to that is to recall the Sphinx and say, "Hey, but I did this great thing. I did this thing to save the city. I'm a good man," he means, right? "I'm a good person. I wouldn't do something like what's been accused, with this curse of the city has arisen from." And so, like Oedipus, I think here we might see in Balin the early signs of a little bit of hubris here, a little bit of confidence. He has been declared a good man, just like Oedipus was declared, the king, the hero of the city. And he sort of takes that and says, well, if that's true, then hey, I'm going to run with it. My sword, I earned it now, he says. So a little bit of pride kind of started to show up here. And we're wondering, where's this going to go? Like he seems to think he can go out and prove himself to Arthur again by defeating this King Rience. We're wondering, like, is this going to go as planned? What about the prophecy that he's going to kill someone that he loves most of all? Is that going to happen? And so like Oedipus, now Balin has this prophecy hovering over his head that he's going to commit some really dark deed in the future, and he sort of seems like, well, I earned the status of having this sword. I'm going to keep it, and let's let fate come as it will. So I do think we still want to. I just want to keep your eyes focused as you read through the next parts of Sir Balin's journey. Keep in mind that he's a man seeking restoration. Keep in mind that at the moment he could have returned the sword, he said, no, I've earned it, and he kept it. So he has this sense of confidence in his own character, confidence in his own abilities. How's that going to turn out? What lesson is Mallory? What is Mallory trying to say to us about Balin, and how can we possibly connect with his journey in our own lives? All right. Well, I hope to see you again on Thursday. Meanwhile, enjoy your reading.